Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Take 5. Let's jump right in. So, we've been recapping the sermon that I preached Sunday in our sixth installment of our Back to Basics series. The message was entitled Comfortable Chains. And we're talking about the Exodus, the plagues that God sent on Egypt to convince Pharaoh to let Israel out of their slavery, to let them out of their bondage. And we're talking about the story all the way up to the point of the Red Sea. And remember, we read a few scriptures in Exodus chapter 8 where the Bible tells us apparently the Israelites had to endure the first three plagues that God sent on Egypt. And we've been talking about that and discussing that, trying to kind of extrapolate and figure out why God would make the Hebrew people endure three of the plagues that all this time I thought were just for Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And so we've been discussing that. Yesterday we talked about the fact that I believe Israel had gotten comfortable in their chains, in their slavery, in their bondage. And we talked about some reasons for that. And today I want you to understand that your comfort is not free. Wherever you might find yourself spiritually comfortable in your life, where you are staying in your bondage, staying in your chains for whatever reason, I want you to understand today, your comfort has consequences. It's not free. You don't get to just enjoy your comfort and relax in the luxury of comfort and not endure the consequences of it. Comfort has consequences. To fully understand that in Israel's story, you have to understand how they ended up getting into slavery in Egypt in the first place. So several years before they were ever enslaved in Egypt, you remember the story of Joseph? Joseph comes into Egypt. He's actually sold into slavery. That's how he's brought into Egypt. And he works there for 13 years. He works as a servant in a man named Potiphar's house. He ends up in prison after that. And then finally, after 13 years of work and 13 years of trial and all kinds of things happening to him, he ends up as the second in command of the entire nation of Egypt, leading them through this terrible famine that the entire world is going through and dealing with. And that's how the people of Israel end up in Egypt to begin with. Joseph's family, his father and his brothers and the whole family come to Egypt to buy food from Joseph and from the Egyptians. And Joseph is reunited with his family. And what happens subsequently from that meeting is that Pharaoh finds out Joseph's family is in town, and that they've come to buy food. And Pharaoh said, Joseph, you're such a good servant, such a good second in command for me. You've been so good to me and my nation. I don't want you just to sell food to your family. I want you to move them here, bring them into Egypt, and I'm going to give them some really good land, and I want you to make them the shepherds over my livestock. I want you to give them jobs. I want you to give them houses. I want you to give them land. I want you to do all of this because you've been so good to me. I want to be good to you. The Bible tells us that Pharaoh gave Joseph's family the land of Goshen. That should sound familiar to you. The land of Goshen to live in. Now, when Joseph's family moved into Egypt, they were a family of about 70 people. And after several hundred years of living in Egypt, now in Exodus, the story we're discussing this week, they're a nation of about 2.4 million people. And here, the Bible tells us that after several hundred years, that Pharaoh that was working with Joseph died, and a new Pharaoh was brought to leadership, brought into power. And the Bible says he didn't know all of the great things that Joseph had done for the Egyptian people. And so he didn't treat the Israelites rather with the same respect and with the same love and with the same honor that the previous Pharaoh had done. And he began to look out and he began to see that the Hebrew people outnumbered the Egyptian people, and so he enslaved them. Now the problem here is that Israel had begun to get comfortable in Egypt anyway. The funny thing is that God had promised them thousands of years before that he was going to give them a promised land as their inheritance, right? The land of Canaan. Well, the funny thing is, when the Israelite people, when Joseph's family, a family of 70, moved to Egypt in the first place, they left the land of Canaan to begin with. They left the promised land to move in to Egypt. And then they got comfortable there. They were given land and they were given houses and they were given jobs and they got comfortable there. But all along, they didn't really want to be there. And the reason I know that is because when Jacob died, Joseph's father, on his deathbed, he made all of his family promise that one day when they left Egypt, they had to take his body and bury it back in the promised land when they got there. And then after he died, several years later, when Joseph became an old man, Joseph did the same thing. Joseph was on his deathbed, and he made his entire family promise that when the Israelites left Egypt, that they were to take his body as well and bury it in the promised land. So clearly, they didn't want to be in Egypt. They wanted to be their own nation the whole time, their own nation in their own land the whole time. But there was something that was keeping them in Egypt, something that was comfortable for them. They had houses, they had jobs, they had land, they had built their lives in this nation that was not their own. They had gotten comfortable there. But the problem is, comfort always comes with consequences. And so hundreds of years later, now Israel finds themselves enslaved in the very place that they had been comfortable. They now have endured because they chose to stay. They chose to stay in a place of comfort. Now they have to endure 430 years of hard slavery and hard affliction. And if that's not enough, towards the end of that, Pharaoh looks out there and he says, slavery is not enough. So now what I want you to do is I want you to kill every male baby that is born to the Hebrew people. I want you to kill them, throw them in the Nile River. So now they have endured 430 years of slavery as a result of their comfort. Now they are having to endure this mass genocide of hundreds of thousands of their children because they chose comfort. And they're still in their chains, still in their affliction. I want you to know our comfort has consequences. And spiritually speaking, for you and me, our comfort has consequences. It always comes with strings attached. It always comes with chains, with bondage, with affliction. Hey, I hope you have a great day today. I'll see you again right here tomorrow on Take 5.